Welcome to the Anderson County Museum. I'm Beverly Childs, Director, and with me today is Allison Hinman, our Curator, and Mr. Marshall Orr. We're going to give you a walkthrough of our exhibit, Two Brothers from Anderson.
The Anderson County Museum was very excited about being able to develop an exhibit about the Orr family. The Orr family are some of the earliest descendants of this county, with Christopher Orr being one of the founding merchants in the city, to James L. Orr, who was the governor of South Carolina after the Civil War, to Dr. Samuel Orr, who was one of the supporters of William Church Whitner, who developed the long transmission of electricity and the reason why Anderson is called the Electric City. In 2009, Martha Orr Davenport, Marshall Orr, and myself began to develop the script for the exhibit. And I was able to hear some wonderful stories about the three children, first being brought up in Herdmont, Georgia, and then moving to Anderson. The two brothers would eventually join a Boy Scout group, Troop 85, with St. John's Methodist Church. I'm going to turn the story over to Marshall
Orr. Thanks, Allison. I'm Marshall Orr, and just to make sure you know kind of where we're headed, Sam Orr was my father, and his brother was Bill Orr, and they're the two brothers we're talking about. They were Eagle Scouts, as I was, and a lot of the things that happened here in Anderson and in South Carolina determined their character formation. Just to give you a little bit of overview of the subject area, if you remember Pearl Harbor, this was the headline the next day, and we declared war on Japan. A lot of things happened, obviously, over the next 4 years, and then we have this headline, Victory in Europe. Now, that was over first. The war over in the Pacific was still going on, and we thought we were going to have to invade the mainland of Japan, and it was going to be extremely bloody. The next thing that happened was that we dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and then 3 days later on Nagasaki. This was the first time a bomb had ever been used, and fortunately the last two times. Then the next day, or 3 days later, I should say, then you get the nice big headline. So we're talking a little bit about what's called the Greatest Generation, the beginning of the war itself, what happened to Bill and Sam, and then it being over. If we go back to my father Sam, when he finished high school in Anderson, he went to Clemson. Clemson at that point was a military school, kind of like the Citadel. And he happened to graduate first in his class. He got something called the Norris Medal, and because he was a valedictorian, he got to go to Washington and be in the White House as a White House aide under FDR. This is a silver bowl, and you may have seen a lot of them, but this one's particularly important to our family. Right before the war, my father was a White House aide, and he was in the White House, and now he was going to get married. He's being called away to be on this kind of secret Enigma coding machine project. And if I read what this says, it says CED, which is Carolyn Elizabeth Diggs, dash SMO, Samuel Marshall Orr, Jr., who's my father, from the White House aides. He was a White House aide, and it was given to my mother and my father on August 15th, 1942, which is the day we were married. And this has been sitting in my mother's living room ever since, and we're very proud of it. And he did that for about 1.5 years. Then he was called into active duty because we had Pearl Harbor. When we got into this war, we knew we needed to have as much intelligence as possible about what the Germans were doing. And we had captured a little machine called an Enigma Machine. It was a coding device and had 3 rotor wheels in there. And they went A through Z and then 0 through 9. And you could put the wheels any way you wanted, and they changed them every day. And it was reputed that there could be up to 125 million combinations. And the Germans probably wouldn't mind if they knew we had one of the machines, because by the time we'd figured out what it meant, then it would have been way too late to do anything about it. But we had, along with the British, all kinds of mathematicians. We brought in the use of computers. We finally captured a code book, and we did figure out how to decode their messages almost instantly. The Germans, the big thing is the Germans never found out that we had broken their code. And my father was chosen to be one of the special people that went over to England and was in a place called Bletchley Park. Churchill had started it. It was near Cambridge, and he was responsible for giving the daily war messages, like what's happening, what are the Germans up to, what their orders were, to Omar Bradley, General Omar Bradley. He was kind of the second in command on D-Day behind Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the supreme Allied commander. My father's job was to tell Omar Bradley what was going on. Interesting letter from my father to my mother that we found out about later was he said, I came out this morning from doing my job. He couldn't say what he did. And I looked overhead, and there were hundreds and hundreds of bombers. And they were lining up to go across the channel. And that was D-Day. That was the Normandy Invasion. And that occurred, and you've probably heard all about that. On D-Day +7, in other words, a week after D-Day, my father was put in a single-engine airplane. He had all the latest German intelligence from this little coding machine, and he also had a suitcase with all the information and a poison pill. And he flew over the English Channel, and he landed on the beaches of Normandy, and he walked into a tent, and there were all the generals that had just spent a week getting there, and they didn't know where the Germans had gone. He was able to relay that. I'm pretty proud of him, and he spent the next I think 5 months with the 12th Army with Omar Bradley, moving from Normandy all the way to Germany. Now that was kind of his story, and it was pretty interesting. Now, meantime, the war over in the Philippines was going on, and Bill Orr had gone to West Point, so he was a career military guy. And he had been assigned to the Philippines, to Manila Bay. And the Japanese started bombing those islands the day after they did Pearl Harbor. It took about 4 months, and our troops, including my uncle, had to surrender. It was the largest surrender of Americans, really ever. And they went on something that's kind of infamous as the Bataan Death March. Bataan was the place. And the Death March lasted, I'm saying, about a month. It was about 90 miles, no food, no drink, and boy, they were pretty rough on our people. A lot of them died and didn't survive that death march. So Bill Orr was a POW for 3.5 years. My father, the people in South Carolina, really didn't know exactly. They had one little Red Cross letter, but they really didn't know very much about how he was doing. Now he was the one in charge. And so he had to negotiate with the Japanese for grains of rice, and he got like a half ration, and there wasn't much food to go around anyway. So he lost, I think, about 60 pounds during that 3.5 years. Now, toward the end of the war, we'd finished in Europe, and the Pacific was still going. The Japanese took the officers on transport ships back to the mainland of Japan. And Bill Orr was in one of the concentration camps, one of the prisoners of war camps. And we thought we were going to have to invade Japan, but we came up with the atomic bomb, which I showed you a headline on. And we bombed Hiroshima. And Bill was located about 80 miles away from where the bomb went off. And we don't really know exactly the reaction, but the atmosphere was really disturbed. And he made the comment later on that all of a sudden the guards started acting friendly. And he was like, why would they act friendly? But they knew the game had changed. And 3 days after Hiroshima was Nagasaki, and 2 days after that, the Japanese, did surrender. Now, in the meantime, my father had gone looking for Bill. He'd left Europe. He had gone over to the Philippines, but he didn't know where he was. He didn't know if he was dead or alive. Turns out he was fine. But if you fast forward a few months later on, my father couldn't find Bill. Bill was back in the States, kind of going to rehab, and undergoing a lot of kind of debriefing. Here in Anderson, on November 2nd, my father was celebrating his birthday, and they didn't know about Bill. Who walked in the door but his brother Bill? Had not seen each other for 3.5 years, and it was quite a tearful and joyful reunion. And they peppered him with questions, and it was like just a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now, to kind of finish up what happened after that, Bill stayed in the military for 5 more years. He was going to be a career person, but he had an accident. He wanted to be a parachutist, and he rented an airplane, and he was practicing doing a drop, and he landed in the Mississippi River, and the parachute was an old-fashioned one, very heavy, and it landed on top of him, and he drowned. So his career was over 5 years after the war was over. My father, Sam, continued on. He ended up working for Haynes Hosiery in Winston-Salem, and he had myself and a brother. Interesting kind of side story. It's called the Two Watches, and you'll be able to see for yourself. But both Bill and Sam were given gold watches when they turned 21 because they had not smoked or had a drink, and I think he was truthful. And my father had his watch, but Bill, back in the Philippines, knew he was going to be captured, and he had taken the watch, he thought, down to a jeweler, had somebody take it down there to get a spring fixed. And when the Japanese invasion occurred, he figured, well, there goes my watch, because the first thing they're going to do is go take things from jewelry stores. But he did not know this, but a Filipino woman had taken his watch along with some other things, and she'd buried it in her backyard. Okay, now 3.5 years goes by. Bill has been freed from being a POW, and he's going back to Manila to be able to fly to the United States. And a buddy he had known said, I know where's that girl, where's that woman, where's that one that took our stuff? I wonder if there's any chance. And lo and behold, they found her. Mystery of mysteries, they found her. They went in the backyard and they dug it up, and there were the two watches. And that made that was almost unbelievable kind of thing that happened. One kind of epilogue or rest of the story you might find interesting. It seemed like it was finished there, and we had a little will about this big, little tiny will. And it said it was one of those being of sound mind and body, it was kind of a format thing. And Bill, my uncle, had kept it in his shoe for 3.5 years while he was a prisoner of war, and he was buried here in Anderson. But we found that there was another will, a will he had done after he came back from Japan, and it was a regular long will, several pages. And in the will he said, my final wish is to have my ashes spread around Manila Bay. That's in the Philippines, because those were the people, the other soldiers, they were the ones he really bonded with. And so my family hired an airplane, and we've got a priest, and we sent some ashes over to Manila, and the plane went up, and they poured the ashes, and they read a poem which was about how he felt in terms of his comradeship with all his buddies. So that's kind of the rest of the story, and we feel really good that we're able to fulfill his last wish.